Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. We are at the end of 2024, and we are going to look at the prediction of what we hope to see in 2025. And I'm joined yet again by Joshua Smith and Charles Love, former participants, and I don't know what else I would say of the legacy that was Untangled Solutions. So, guys, welcome to the
Conspirators?
show.
I think
It's
conspirators would
conspirators.
be
There we
cool.
go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
I won't even talk about, well, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day, another episode. So, Josh, we
Yes.
can just start this off with you had some concerns that you didn't get everything off your chest with regards to 2024. So, I'll let you start with anything you want to pull back into before we look at what you see coming on the horizon for 2025.
I think I got most of them, and again, thank you, Charles, for doing my work for me and coming with all those points. Yeah, it was mostly just again, I think there's a lot of things. It's hard to talk about 2024 and where things are going without then talking about 2025. So I also blame you, Chris, for this
Fair.
format for
It
forcing
is
me
my fault.
to bifurcate my mind. But I think we talked a lot of good things. I think the momentum is going to carry right on through into 2025. So, things like the whole Gen AI thing, staffing, I think vendor consolidation, I think that's the stuff that we're talking about, kind of starting to really build momentum in 2024. And I think a lot of that is we're still going to be talking about that in 2025.
That's fair. Like it's like kind of like saying it's changing, but it's not changing fast enough that the topics are net new.
Yeah, it's not like everything just waits for the calendar to change. It goes like, oh, finally, I can do this now, right? It's a continuum.
So I'll throw one out, and maybe this will actually trigger some dark conversation or light conversation. I think it was ISC squared made this comment that they're envisioning that there will be a shift from protection in the cybersecurity space and a move towards resilience. That it's more about withstanding the earthquake than it is about um, trying to keep an earthquake from happening.
I just actually heard that from a CISO that we were chatting with. They talked about like, we're trying to do all we can with prevention, but in some things, we'd rather focus on the detection and response. So if we have the risk and we have a control for the risk in terms of how do we respond to it, right? The breach doesn't happen until they get active, actions on objectives, right? So until they get those credentials, until they're able to exfil, right? It's not a full breach in their mind. It was like if we
Sure.
can stop them at logging in, right? They get to log in, they do a lateral movement, maybe they do a privilege escalation. If we can stop it there, they don't really see that as bad as then they were able to grab stuff and exfil it. So moving more towards like we can prevent as much as we want, but we're never going to be fully right. So then let's also kind of start to focus on that containment investigation response phase of things as well. It's funny you bring it up.
Wow. So like I kind of likened it to like, if you're cooking in the kitchen, just because you've never had a fire doesn't mean you should not have a fire extinguisher. So, like, yes, the stove caught on fire, but you didn't burn the house down.
But there can still be damage is also the
Right.
problem, right? So it's
But
it's
you want
it's
to minimize.
it's like an acceptance, moving towards that kind of like, how are we going to handle this risk? We're not always going to prevent the risk, but so how do we like accept it? How do we mitigate it? How do we deal with that risk when it happens rather than trying to stop it from happening?
All right, what do you got as far as an expectation, Charles?
Well, I think 2024 taught us that AI and those kind of things need to be better defined, right? So we have a lot of things out there where people are mistaking automation for AI, right? When I
Right.
mean AI, I mean like, the ChatGPT, the language models, Copilot, all that kind of fun
Sure.
stuff. Even on the iPhones now, right? Hey, you should probably reword this email, right? That kind of stuff. But a lot of vendors and people make automations and allude to the fact it's the magic of AI when it's simply not. So
It's
I
simply
think,
automation.
yeah, it's just automation, right? It's kind of like the old conversation we used to have. Hey, do you have ticket integration? We send emails. That is not ticket integration, right? Into a PSA. And then that used to be the buzzword back in the day. And then it turned into, no, 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 we have integration now.
I
So
remember, wasn't it something monkey that would take an email and actually do the integration? Like it would take it, parse it, and actually do
yep.
meaningful things with it. Something monkey. I can't remember what it's called. I just
Yeah,
remember
there's
the
a
monkey
couple of them.
part.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think to that effect, and while we're defining it, I think that there is going to slowly, I think we're starting to see the pivot that people that at this point, I think a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors have kind of just wedged Gen AI into usage and tools. I think, and but I also think that the kind of return on progress, I think the advancements it's been making, specifically around generative AI, have started to kind of plateau. And so I think
Sure.
we're going to see the plateauing of Gen AI because I think, from what I'm reading to, it's starting to not really like all the iterations are starting to kind of be more minimal. They're not making the leaps and bounds that they were before. So I think we're going to see that kind of the plateau of generative AI and then new models of how we can take advantage of that and kind of build it into larger kind of AI use cases. So we're starting to hear a lot more terms around like agentic AI. So AI that
Sure.
can use generative AI, but then start to take actions, build out like plans of action, like relook at its plan, replan
Learning.
time based on, yeah, so essentially like a self-learning model that can use Gen AI for both kind of taking instructions, but also giving instructions. It's more like a piece of the puzzle rather than the full puzzle itself, is where I see kind of Gen AI kind of starting to fit into a unique spot rather than kind of a catch-all.
But I think people are still trying to understand what it actually is, right?
Sure.
So Apple did a really great job. They made this thing called Image Playground, right? And you take a picture and then with your finger you click duck, hat, cruise ship, right? And then you hit go, and in the back end, it's basically like an image journey going, please take this photo, put it on a cruise ship, put a duck in the photo, make it on the water, right? It's it's kind of like, I don't know, paint by numbers AI. Like it's a pretty front end, but on the back end, it's just doing the stuff that we've been knowing how to do for years.
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
but I think we're going to see more people take away all the
Using
hard
it.
stuff, right? Because not for nothing, 6 months ago, it was all about prompts. People
Right.
were on Etsy, people were on Fiverr selling prompts. I don't think in 6 months I've heard prompts, right? Aside from a C prompt, like that used to be the thing to make the most out of the AI platform is you had to have your prompts all in, and now it's gotten so much better. You could just say, "I want to boat on a with the duck on the cruise ship," and then it makes it, right? Just
But
it's
like in part, we're really identifying, and I heard someone say this, we're using generative AI to go after or attempt to solve the wrong problems. And, like to your point, Charles, like if you think about the compute power that goes into doing that, is that a good use or a bad use? It's entertaining. I mean, I spent 20 minutes yesterday and I created a hip hop song for the trust mark, and I had it, style it in the form of Nelly's Pimp Juice. And I thought, well, how accurate is this going to be? Like, I could tell that it was done in the style of Nelly's music, and it was like, it sounded like someone actually created it. Is that what I should be using AI for? Probably not. But the things that come to mind for me is like, I think back to what Charles or what you said, Josh. Like, it's almost like we've gotten to the point where we've poured the foundation for something that we haven't been able to envision should look like. And so, because we haven't figured that out, we keep adding to this concrete or whatever, material we're using to pour the foundation. But all we're doing is continuing to make this foundation bigger and bigger and bigger. Going back to what you said is at some point, it's taking what those things give us the capability for, and now either combining them in unique ways to do something else, or even start all over again because we figured out there's a better way to write this formula. It might even be written by the same Gen AI that we have built out through these, LLMs. I think there's so much that we have not tapped into because we're so, I guess that's to your point, Charles, of like we're still using the thing like, oh, cool, I can do a better picture or I can, draw art that people might want to buy. But all those things now have tie-ins to ethics, um, plagiarism. Where did the information that helped build it get sourced from? Like, what are like the rules still are being written for how we navigate this going forward. I think this could be the year on AI. That is how the rules or the boundaries start to form. I mean, we have a whole new administration coming into office, and one of the things we already know is there's going to be a group dedicated to how do we put boundaries on AI. Whether or not they do it well, obviously that remains to be seen.
Well, they're also building the cars they drive in, right?
Sure,
So things are the
it's
the
better than a
the the
plane,
well, yeah, but the enhancements are coming so fast,
right?
right? Like I am a notorious photo bomber, right? So if I'm at a conference and somebody's taking a photo, I guarantee you I'm going to make a goofy face behind them, right? And now that even on the iPhone, I think Android has it too, you could just click my dumb face and then remove it, right?
Sure.
And then it uses the magic in the back end, and now Charles is gone, right?
But do we do we
Um,
do we dub
End of
that
an
Charles
era.
mode? Yeah, can we just call it Charles mode? That's
yeah,
what
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
There's
But like,
royalties. I can't call it that.
but 6 months ago, a year ago, maybe for Android, because I think they had it for a bit, but like the mainstream ability to like even with Photoshop, to take a photo and expand upon it, and it looks like downright amazing is fascinating. And we didn't think about that stuff in January of last year.
So I have another prediction to add to the equation. I've seen this in 2024 quite a bit. I think the conversation we touched on a little bit around, answering an insurance questionnaire and whether or not you are or are not doing it. One of the things I think is going to come into play on a much larger scale is that third-party risk management
Mm.
and the supply chain. So, we touched on a couple of them, but like thinking about like the solar winds, the CrowdStrike, thinking about silos versus all in on one platform. I think, especially in the MSP space, doing due diligence on what are the risks that you're willing to accept. How are you managing risks with your, third parties? And obviously, we're even seeing tools come out to help you manage third party. Of course, it's run by AI, but, what are your thoughts around that?
I'll tell you, information drives change,
Right.
right? So recently, it was brought to my attention that I'll just give you an example. Greenshot, which is a very, widely used screenshot program, has an open CVE and has had for some time. Um, and reading that, the answer is they have a stable version and they have an unstable version. The stable version was made years ago, and that since the CVE was found, there literally is like five or six different iterations, but they're all the quote unquote unstable version. I don't feel comfortable running that. And I'm using the information that my tools are providing, going, hey, Charles, there's an open CVE on stuff that's found on your device. And we're taking that and we're making a conscious decision to say, is this a risk I want to take? Just like you
Sure.
had said. And the likelihood of somebody running a remote code execution when I hit the print screen key, it's low, but it ain't zero.
So is
You know
winning
what I
the
mean?
lottery.
Yeah. So, but nowadays we're taking things a little bit more and saying, well, you know what? Maybe that isn't the best choice for us, right? Maybe I do need to just learn how to use the built-in tool, which is amazing now, right?
Right.
But my point here is lots of tools are providing information that I don't want to say we ignored, but we really didn't listen to. Now we're taking a little more uh, of a hardened stance, and just to make you kind of smile for a minute, the whole green shot conversation. Um, my main focus on removing it was I don't want to have to report to the auditor for Trustmark why we have something with an open CVE, so it's got to go. right, for the CompTIA trust mark. So just kind of funny.
Well, I think that's a very valid way to say it. I'm not necessarily meaning because of the trust mark, but the whole CVE thing is interesting too, right? Because it's not looking at the probability that it'll happen, right? Like it's looking at the actual if I had the frictionless environment to execute, what would happen. And I think that's part of why I think we're going to see I will predict in 2025, I think we're going to see a new scoring model come out
Yeah,
that will likely help with this, because if you go look at the third party risk management piece just by itself, I think one of the things that's happening right now is asking better questions, right? Doing research on the history of the company. Like, yeah, you might not say we're going to use AT&T versus Verizon from a cellular choices for our organization because, that's a tough decision. They've both been hit. Which one do I go with? Like, how are they improving? But like, I was looking at some VoIP solutions the other day from a security perspective, and I just won't say the name of the VoIP provider. It's probably easy to deduce if you did some homework on VoIP carrier that still has a known vulnerability that is easy to exploit in the wild that has been they've provided a patch for it, but I can't remember how many thousands of the phone systems still exist for a patch that has existed now for going on 4 years that can still be, compromising to that entire phone system for that organization. That's concerning to me because I would think as a vendor that there would be a little bit more voice and communicating to those using their products that, hey, this patch needs to get, applied because it's not just a CVE, it's a you are going to get hit at some point because it's exposed to the outside world, right? And I don't
yeah,
think we're seeing enough of that with you guys have heard me say this before. We have a voice and we can choose to be quiet or we can choose to be loud. And I think in some cases, we are doing very little to communicate loudly enough when there's a real problem that has not been addressed. And, whether it's choosing to make that voice with your wallet, wallet share. I think it's ironic when an MSP says, yeah, we've chosen to not use that company anymore because of how they operate, for our 150 seats. So maybe that doesn't have a huge impact. But I know there are MSPs that have wallet share that are more like 5,000 and 10,000 endpoints that don't do a good job of being vocal about their decisions for leaving a vendor who is not willing to address the security challenges within their company. I just went on a rampage there. I'm sorry.
No, it's like and I think Charles makes a great point and kind of folding into his open CVE issue is what I'm hearing more about, even in the enterprise space, is a lot more people noticing more of the small details, but not having enough people to take care of those small details.
yeah,
And so I get questioned a lot, like Reliaquest, we focus purely on security events, right? But I get asked almost every time, will you manage our vulnerability management tool for us? Right? Because that's getting pushed into the security team, even though I kind of view it more as an IT function, right? Like having an unpatched machine isn't a security event; it's a precursor to a
Right.
security event. And if that is exploited, then it becomes a security event. But I think it's on the IT to at least keep the walls up. So I see an increase in reporting to leadership, new asks around metrics. So instead of, hey, how many alerts did we get this month? It's more along the lines of, what is our coverage, around certain TTPs that we're seeing in the news or threat actors we're seeing in
Sure.
the news, right? So I think the metrics is pushing even a bigger cyber spend because we're seeing the percentage of the IT budget going to security. At least I'm seeing it starting to creep up, and I don't think that's coming away anytime soon. Especially as you can only throw so many bodies at this kind of problem, right? Like Charles was saying, like it's great that they have the time to look at that, but if you're an organization that doesn't do IT or security as a function, right? And you have a team in there, they're probably understaffed and underpaid and under resourced. So to ask them to keep on top of every single CVE that comes out of the
Sure.
hundreds probably of software and
for sure.
SaaS solutions you have in play, I think is unnecessary. So I think that outsourcing to the ever increasing XDR marketplace, I think we're going to see a big trend on that because we can't keep the butts and seats. Because as soon as you train someone to do something from scratch, they're going to get their LinkedIn blowed up and be offered probably 2x what you're paying them, right? So I think that we
Hence
as
the
a
talent
vendor
shortage we
marketplace,
have.
yeah, we as a vendor marketplace have to be able to provide more tangible solutions to around the things that I think that businesses are really starting to understand are the big threats that are kind of like the sleeping giants in their environment.
Yeah. So I think you're spot on. I have one more that I think will take us to the end of this. So uh, looking at zero trust architecture, I think I had this conversation the other day. I think that Zero Trust, when it originally came out, obviously super complicated. You know, you look at a desktop environment, you're like, oh my word, there's 159 applications running on this thing. How do I, move this to Zero Trust? Like, do I need to account for, all of the, .NET, scripts or whatever running? How many versions of Java is okay? Four versions of FTP, or not FTP, like Adobe Acrobat or a PDF editor.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, like today, a lot of that stuff can be automated, right? We're going to allow listen only for the first 30 days. We'll identify what we know definitively should not be in there, clean it up. But I think there's zero trust in so many different categories today that we didn't even talk about before. So, like zero trust from a network standpoint, zero trust from an application install standpoint, and obviously the list can go on and on and on. Like, no, you don't just get a role change or access to something because you just asked for it. There has to be a reasoning behind why you're asking, and it has to be vetted and verified that you in fact should be given that access. What are your guys' thoughts on seeing the expansion of zero trust becoming more than just I brought in a vendor and so now I have zero trust?
Well, I think it's like Charles was saying before, we're still trying to understand what AI is. I think the business ecosystem is still trying to understand what the heck ZTNA is, right? Because it's not a product you can buy, right? It's more like an approach, a framework, if you will. Same with I was asked the other day to give some references around what SASE products I think were the most outstanding. I'm looking at them and I try to like figure out like I go to a couple different vendors, and again, it's kind of like here's
What
our SASE
category?
stack, and inside of that was zero trust, right? And
Sure.
I'm like, so it's like the snake eating its own tail, right? Because I'm like, wait a minute, I thought SASE was part of ZTNA, but now they're saying no, ZTNA is part of SASE. And it's just really, I don't want to throw people on the bus. It's just certain organizations that are paid to make up terms for industries and have to deal with quadrants. They need to keep coming up with cool acronyms and cool approaches and cool frameworks of maybe things that have kind of already been in the ecosphere for a while, but they need to put a label on it so they can create a ranking for it. So I think that slowly but surely, right, we're getting the SSO, we're getting the multi-factors becoming more and more of a commonplace thing. We're getting more of really moving away from VPN gateways, VPN clients to more of that. Okay, we're going to have you go into a vendor's cloud and then direct you from there to wherever the nearest resource is. So I don't think it's like a monolithic, like stamp, like, mission accomplished, right?
Right.
CTNA done. I think it's more just like a game of inches.
Do you think it's so to that, do you think so if I were to give ZTNA more of a success trajectory as we go into 2025. It's less about achieving zero trust across everything and more about using the concept behind zero trust and how it came about than it is about the destination, right? Like if you put the right things in place, like, hey, you can't get to that cloud service without being here first. You've created, an entry point that has created a zero trust of sorts, right? Like if you don't have a PIN code and you don't know how to get to here, that like you haven't followed the map that gets you to the treasure, well, then you can't get to that next hop. There's no clues for you until you get to there and you have to authenticate. Like, is that maybe a better model to approach as we go into 2025? It's not about like, oh man, you got to have a perfect list of, your approved applications and your zero trust of what gets allowed or not allowed, but more of like an exercise or a process that says we're constantly working to improve. Do we really need that? And if we don't, then let's get rid of it. But rather than doing this whole like, I'm just going to go at this with a machete and we'll get it to the point where, QuickBooks, payroll, yeah, we can't do that anymore because we are zero trust.
Yeah, I think, and I want to hear Charles' thoughts on this, but I think just like everything in security operations, it's a journey, not a destination,
Yep.
right? It's just like,
Preaching.
we build a 10-foot wall and the cyber criminals build themselves an 11-foot ladder, right? And so it's a constant game of cat and mouse. So anyone that says we're done, walk away, right? Then there would be no ransomware. We wouldn't have seen the biggest ransomware attack in the history because, like, hey, once EDR was on the scene, hey, I thought ransomware was going to be gone, right? It's always a cat and mouse game, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future, maybe until quantum computers come around. But that's what I see is like, don't strive for perfect, drive through with good.
Is that the battle for Helm's Deep in essence? The taller the ladder, the reality was if those that were defending Helm's Deep would have recognized that no fortress is truly impenetrable, they might have actually never had to lose Helm's Deep.
Maybe we can learn something from that. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Sounds what you got.
But yeah,
Well, so it's interesting, right? Because Josh is playing at a very different level than most MSPs, right? So what
He's
he's
a
seeing
vendor.
is, well, yeah, but he's not dealing with the 50, 100 user networks,
yeah,
right?
not an
Sure.
SMB. Yeah,
Yeah, it's, he's looking at 50 to 100 users per floor. And,
yeah.
so a little bit more capital to make some changes. But we are starting to see, like, on the smaller MSP side, um some insurance carriers with the questionnaire, which is no longer 4 questions. I had one the other day that was like 6 pages. It's
Yeah.
actually asking, how do you segment your traffic? How
Uh-huh.
do you segment guest machines? I had one that literally referenced Control One the other day. I was amazed.
Yeah.
Um, do you have a ZTNA such as Control One? And they rambled off a couple of, Avalon one, a few other ones. Um, and the insurance questionnaire sometimes helps drive business change. Like, I want everything to be yes. How do I make everything yes? It's like, yes, we've been telling you about this for 5 years. Like, these are all the things I've been quoting you. Oh, is that what that stuff is? So we're starting to see some changes there. It's not going as fast as one would like. But like Josh said earlier, a lot of vendors are coming out with solutions. SonicWall just came out with an amazing new VPN solution, where it's very similar to zero trust networking, where you have to meet certain criteria to get on the network to do these things, and
Sure.
we're seeing a lot of innovation with some vendors who you wouldn't expect that.
Yeah, that reminds me of like what Cloudflare released under their Warp Plus
Yeah,
product, where you can do the gateway, and if you don't have the connection to the gateway to go out on the network, you eliminate the ability to do anything, which I found quite interesting. You said it, Charles, and I think this wraps up where we're at in this episode. Will totally wrap up for the future outlook. We have all definitively said this repeatedly on last week's episode and this week's episode: the necessity for cybersecurity insurance. The one significant change is the way in which the questions are being asked. And to your point, Charles, I saw one the other day that actually asked for the person to be named that was responsible for the network.
yeah,
And it didn't say VLAN, it was like the whole network architecture. And it wanted like there's 6 questions in there, like it starts with a name, and then it was like phone number, email address. And I'm like, okay, I kind of get this. I kind of understand where they're coming from. And the MSP that asked me about it said, how does this work, right? Like we're responsible for the client's network. And I said, yes, but you're not accountable for their network. They are. And so anytime you see that individual name being called out, they need a point of contact. And I think that's one of the things that is largely being missed right now is a lot of the questions on the questionnaire are not about how to, prevent you from getting insurance. They're about understanding how if you call upon them because you need to make a claim, who are they talking to? Is this a real claim? Like, if the person who's calling in isn't on the approved list to call the insurance company, I would be really upset if that insurance carrier said, awesome, we've launched the investigation, the attorney has been engaged, and oh, by the way, yeah, you didn't get the payout. And they're like, we didn't make a claim. I don't know who called you, right? Like, there's a
yeah,
lot coming in that regards, I think, on the insurance side, to even qualify for coverage anymore.
Well, personally, I think in 2025, the insurance companies are going to start saying, okay, how proven, right, to pull from compliance? You said yes, show
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
Yep.
or have a third party. I'm also seeing a requirement for a third party to assess the questionnaire and answer on the behalf of the like a neutral third party.
Yeah.
Like, because it's easy to
Sure.
say yes, 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 and then they get hit, and the insurance company says, "Well, you didn't answer this right," and then it's a lawsuit. Or if they could at the very beginning say, "Before we even agree to give you a policy, you have to prove that these yeses are true."
Well,
Yes.
I don't know if it's like by you, but I have a family member who is literally paid to go to people's homes all throughout the US and look for things like trampolines, fences around pools, how does the roof look? Like for home insurance, when they say they've done certain things, this dude literally goes state to state. He gets a list and he goes and looks and he reports back that yeah, so and so has a trampoline. They said they didn't, or so and so has a pool, doesn't have a pool fence on their pool and they have a 3-year-old, right? So they're actually setting out a human to do homeowner inspections, like from the street. They're not like going in the yard, stuff like that. But they're validating.
Sure.
Whereas before they just took your word and everything is groovy, but they're actually sending out human people to start validating these insurance policies.
And in 2026, they're going to no longer send out humans; they're just going to send out drone swarms
Yeah,
to do
yes.
all that instead.
Well, it'll
So
be generative AI out of the TV that just happens to have a camera that looks out into the backyard.
so very funny. This is super topical. You mentioned the drone storm. Clearwater, I'm in Florida, right? Clearwater, Florida. They actually just sent out a huge public, they went through email, Facebook, text, everything. We are using drones to inspect the waterways. Like we got a notice today saying you will see drones in the air. Do not panic. This is normal. And it's a whole press release as to why they're
Awesome.
going to be flying drones because everyone's going to freak out. Oh my God, the drones are back.
Well,
Now,
I
now,
mean, I
Charles,
think
did it
that,
say "Don't panic" or did it say "Dear Florida man, don't shoot down"?
yeah,
Yeah, it
It was
probably
implied.
should,
Probably
but
implied.
it did come from
they,
Clearwater PD.
that's
So
different for the swamp areas. That's they get a different press release. That's different, Josh.
yeah,
That's a different. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I guarantee.
That's right.
the younger the younger communities, it's like no cap, don't shoot.
They've got a legend for those reading it, like, oh no, no, this doesn't
Yeah,
apply to you. This doesn't apply to you.
Right.
Last thought on the cyber insurance. I think that might be the most positive thing that we could have for cybersecurity, not because of insurance, but when you think about self-attestation, that's largely been a common practice, which every insurance questionnaire is essentially that, right? I answer the questions, I'm self-attesting to doing these things. Um, there are actually frameworks now in the SMB space, SMB 1001, based out of Australia.
yep,
They have a paid assessment level one. It's like $300-400 US dollars. You are self-attesting. And at first I had the conversation with them. I said, but do you think there's really any teeth to this? And the response was, they have agreed to an insurance questionnaire in the way they answered that said, I not only am attesting to doing this, there is teeth to what I've attested to because if I'm not doing it and something does happen, it's going to be potentially catastrophic to my company as opposed to I'm paying the money to just say I am knowingly paying this money to say I did these things actually takes it to another level, right? Because when you apply for insurance, in a lot of cases, it's microscopic dollars being spent unless you've already been hit with something. But then when you are hit with something, assuming you can get insurance again, boy, it would have been nice to have somebody check your stuff, have a third party come in and say, yeah, you got part of this right, but not the whole thing. And I think that's one of the things we're going to see more of in 2025, where self-attestation is going to have teeth attached to it
yeah,
by the very nature of the way it's being issued.
I agree.
Wow. That brings 2024 to an end. I wish everybody a happy new year. Guys, I appreciate you coming on. Until next year.
Thanks, everybody.